Welcome, and thank you for checking in at the Inner Game of Change podcast, where I focus on exploring the multi-layers of managing organizational change. My name is Ali Juma, and you're listening to the Inner Game of Change podcast. Today, my guest is Gorell, an established global high-performance coach, author, and a change expert. Having been a business leader and change specialist for over 30 years, Ro has first-hand experience in the challenges leaders face during transforming their organizations. Being an expert in coaching teams through change, in this episode, Ro and I chat about the complexity of leading change, the various strategies to coach teams through change, and the role of the change managers to contribute to organizational behaviors. I'm grateful to have Ro chatting with me today. Well, Ro, thank you so much for joining the Inner Game of Change podcast. Very grateful for your time and so excited to have you as my guest.
Fantastic. Thank you. I'm very pleased to be your guest.
Thank you very much. So, Ro, I'd like, before we jump into the topic of coaching and something that you're really passionate about, and you've got quite a few publications about it, and you're very active on LinkedIn as well. Before we get into that, I'd like my listeners to know a little bit about you and about your business.
Fantastic. So obviously I can tell you a lot about me. So I'm going to pick on two particular things that are probably of interest to listeners. So my journey to coaching came through me having a personal coach myself back in the early 2000s. And I learned the value of having a coach and the difference it made not only to me as an individual, but to the way I showed up at work. And at that stage, I was leading a change program. And so it helped me understand how I connected with stakeholders. It helped me understand how I created messaging around working with different groups of stakeholders. And it also gave me the confidence to actually step into my own personal power. So for me, coaching really became something that I am rather than a sort of a skill that I do. It's something I was naturally doing anyway without realizing what it was. And in terms of my own leadership, it changed the way I led my team. So I moved away from being that sort of hub and spoke command and control. I mean, I never was command and control, but it meant that I stepped back even more and allowed the space to for the team to actually grow and become more self-organizing. So that when I actually left the team a couple of years later, they were able to lead themselves and hopefully grow from what we actually started to create together as a team from that, as I say, early 2000s. The second thing to say about me is that I'm very eclectic in where I get information and resources and ideas. So I love the concepts that are out there in terms of change. I love the concepts around coaching and complexity. And what I try to do in my writing, I try to help people make use of that in the world of work. So all of my books are about creating tools, yes, and also approaches and methods for people to actually apply concepts and be creative about the way they work with change and coaching.
Fantastic. And what about your business now? Grow Talent?
Yes, so Grow Talent is focusing on leveraging that collective performance. So for me, organizations are collections of teams, and it's not about any one individual, it's about the team. And as you would imagine, teamwork is one of my highest values, along with autonomy, which is a key value for me. So no wonder I wrote about self-organizing teams. So that collaborative teamwork, that smarter working practices, and also building positive work environments, that's really what Grow Talent is about. And it started life with a book I wrote back in 2011 on talent management. And at the time, in the UK in particular, there was very much a focus on the war for talent, which was this myth that was popularized by McKinsey, where they talked about, you've got to look after your 10% of top talent. which for me didn't make any logical sense whatsoever, because at the end of the day, if you've only got 10% of the people that are talent and you're ignoring the other 90%, then why bother hiring them? So for me, it's about leveraging that collective talent and making the best of all of the collective skills, because together you can actually achieve more than any one individual can. So you want a team of star players, not just one star player in a team.
Ro, how do you define a talent? What is a talent?
A talent is something that you are good at. It's something that you are good at and you enjoy doing. So for me, I'm good at many things, but I don't enjoy them. So, for example, I worked in HR for 10 years, and I was told by people at the time that I was good at that, but I didn't enjoy it. In fact, I started to hate working in HR, and I didn't want to go to work in the mornings because I just did not enjoy it. So a talent has got to be something that you both are good at and you enjoy doing. And so coaching for me is one of the things that I love doing. I'm still learning, I've been doing it for a long time. It doesn't mean that I'm not learning still. I am. And I think you have to keep that beginner's mind. So for me, a talent is all about something you're good at and you enjoy doing.
And coaching is a very, coaching is a very, very difficult thing, because coaching requires, from my understanding anyway, requires a high level of self-awareness, leaving your ego out of the door, uncovering somebody or helping somebody realize their potential is a very, very tough job.
It is, yeah. And, that ability to self-reflect and learn from what happens is as important for you as the coach as it is for the individual or the team that you're coaching. So yeah, it's complex. When you're working with teams, you are working in complexity. Therefore, you cannot, there's not a rule book that you can follow. There are certain practices that you can follow for sure, but you never know what's going to happen in an environment. Individually coaching people as well, you never know how people are showing up. So you have to have a high degree of self-awareness and awareness of others, and that ability to observe and reflect in the moment. And obviously, like everything, sometimes that goes well, sometimes it doesn't go so well. So you have to let go of that needing to be performing all the time, and just accept that everything is a learning opportunity, and be in service to the client.
And I think the success also depends on the coachee as well. I always see that it's a team sport when it comes to uncovering somebody's potential. The coach can only do as much, the trainer can only do as much. It's a mutual responsibility. I was thinking about your work, and I was thinking about the capability of coaching. When you coach someone or you coach a team, you're encouraging them to go into a level of discomfort, which is another way to say you're asking them perhaps to change some of the ways. How they change it, that's entirely up to how much effort and time they're going to put into it. But from where you sit, coaching is about moving somebody from A to B, and B presumably is better than A, but the better requires sacrifice, whether it's timing, practice, study. What are some of the strategies that worked for you over the years when you move people into discomfort?
Yeah. So you're absolutely right. And, no matter whether you're working as a team coach or as an individual coach, it is, at the end of the day, the client has always got to sit in that place of discomfort, because that's usually where the biggest learning is. And I think our roles as coaches is to help them and support them through that discomfort stage and help them become reflective learners. So it's like, what are you noticing? What is the team noticing at this moment in time? What are the implications for the team going forward? How does this serve the team? How does this hinder the team? It's all of those kind of practical questions that help, and making it okay for the team to feel that, so how you set up the coaching relationship from the beginning, that it is about growth, and growth by its nature means that you're going to feel a bit uncomfortable. And it's also about, okay, so understanding, where are you at now? How uncomfortable are you willing to go? Or how much discomfort are you willing to to sort of experience, because they dictate the pace at which they learn. We're not, the team might not be ready yet for that growth.
Yes.
And it might be after the coaching session that realization comes out. It could be that they, on reflection, they learn something about what that discomfort was really about. So those practices of contracting with the team, and the team contracting with itself, more importantly, about how they're going to handle that. It's about creating space for them to reflect and pause, and observe what's happening in the team at the moment. So I think all of those really good coaching skills around how you create the space for learning, and how you create the space for safety are really important practices. And sometimes in the heat of the moment, you get into action mode and you forget that that's part of, you've got the outcomes that the team is trying to achieve, and then you've got the learning process by which the team achieves those outcomes, and both are equally important. So it's about creating that space for that.
I was listening to, I was reading something which somebody wrote about when David's statue was carved in the stone. Obviously, they asked Michelangelo, where did you start? And he said, no, David was already there. All I did, I removed the unnecessary pieces in the stone. So every time I hear coaching, I get, I remind myself that the potential is there. The coach is actually just helping me uncover that potential. Is that close to how you think about it?
I love that. Yeah, I love that, because that's exactly what we do as coaches, is we help the team realize that they do have the resources, they do have the potential to be, fantastic. And what we're doing is helping them carve that statue, so that they can see this beautiful sort of image of David at the end. So I love that. It's a brilliant metaphor for what coaching is. Yeah.
Yes. We are going into a period of, high velocity of change, lots of projects happening, whether it's actually COVID or unrelated to COVID. In fact, one of my guests, Antonio, calls it, we are in the project economy. And I always say we are in the change economy, which is kind of the same. How does a reflection happen when you are really in a fast mode?
I think that's a really great question. And I think it's what a lot of organizations struggle with, because they are being driven by metrics. They're being driven by stakeholder requirements. And I think it's very challenging in that environment. And by the way, it's no different to the project that I mentioned earlier in the 2000s. I think the difference at the moment is that technology is increasing the pace. But I think there's always been that level of change. It's just not been as noticeable. And I think COVID has accelerated that pace of change. And it's probably highlighted some of the things that were systemic that we hadn't appreciated because it was out of our awareness. So I think, yes, it is very challenging for teams. I think, you don't have to spend hours reflecting. You do, however, need to create some space to reflect and pause. And I think there's, thinking back to my business improvement days as well, there's often this thing that if we've got to get fast into action because then we feel as though we're making progress. However, sometimes if you do that, the old plan, do, check, act cycle, if you do the planning first before you go into doing, yes. It actually does save you time. Yeah. So I think as human beings, we have these biases that go on that create falsehoods without us being aware. And one of those biases that we think that always by going to action, we're going to get there quicker, when in fact, if you just pause for a few minutes and think about what are we really trying to achieve here? What's working? What isn't working? Are we actually going in the right direction? What we're doing together as a team, is that helping? Is it hindering us? Just simple questions like that. Then it creates that pause in that constant movement. So I would say there are always opportunities, but you do have to work, and you have to work harder to create those opportunities because of this bias to action that I think the system is probably exacerbating or creating, or there's definitely a correlation at the very least.
And I think look, I'm a strong believer in coaching. LinkedIn sometimes refers me people that they would like to be coached, and I ask myself, can I add any value to this person? My first coach was actually it was in 1997 in New Zealand, and I didn't really understand what a coach does. I thought they are like a trainer, and I still remember the conversations now. Now it took me years later to start practicing all of those things, and actually seeing the value. So sometimes you don't see an immediate value, and if you're after an instant gratification, it's not going to happen. With the way we have our mindsets change, our behaviors change, takes time.
Yeah.
And that's what you're asking for. You need to have the level of patience to really understand. And the reflection gives you that that time. It's like almost, and if people complain they don't have the time, I always say that it's like you're going on the highway on the high speed lane, and there's somebody in front of you. To overtake them, you need to slow down to go faster. Yeah. And the idea is that reflection may take time, but will help you go faster later.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's how I look at it. Part of your work, you actually work with organizations about culture change. I mean, that is a complex piece of work. Where do you start with that, Ro?
So, well, first of all, what do we mean by culture? So there are different ways of approaching this, but that's the first thing that I need to understand is how are you defining what the culture is here? And there is usually more than one culture. You've got the stated culture, and then you've got the actual culture, the lived experience of the culture. And there's usually subcultures that are happening in the organization as well. So that's why culture change is so difficult, because you need to, what's your baseline? Where are you starting from? So rather than talk about culture, I would always refer to behaviors. What are the behaviors that you're noticing? What are the things that people value here? So that's not the values, because usually they're just the sort of the marketing spin that organizations put out as part of their branding. But the values are, what are the lived experience? What does it really mean? What do you need to do to get promoted here? What happens with behavior here? If somebody does something that isn't okay, what happens? Do they get reprimanded? Do they get pulled up about it? Do people comment on it? Do people ignore it? So it's those kind of things that tell you what's happening, and you address those rather than going for this amorphous blob that is called culture change. It's like, what is it that's happening at the moment that you think isn't helping the organization? What needs to change? And then let's understand, okay, so what are the behaviors that are actually causing those things at the moment? And, I don't wish to be political, but if you look at what's happening in the UK, you've got the stated comments that come out in the press from the leaders, and then you've got the actions that they take, which are diametrically opposed to the comments that they make in the press. And so it's immediately obvious what the culture is. Even though they've said it's one thing, it's obvious that culture isn't what they've stated. Yeah. So those are the kind of things that I look at when I look at culture, and try to avoid the word culture change, because culture change is not a project plan. It's not something that you can say, oh, we're starting here and we're going to go there, because for exactly the reasons that you just said, it's about taking time and patience, and a culture will not change overnight. You've got to give it time. And the challenge that we have in organizations is that typically senior leadership doesn't, you're looking at 5 to 10 years to change culture, really. Yeah. And how often do you see senior leaders staying 5 to 10 years in organizations? And they're the ones who set the rules by which the culture, the system in which that culture exists and thrives or not.
Yeah. Yep. And that's why I described it really difficult, because it's almost like a moving sand, and I hope when you work with organizations, you start with the leadership, because that's a major lever for how the culture is and what is accepted and not accepted.
Yeah. So just picking up on that, my ideal client, if I'm being completely honest, my ideal client are those clients who are looking to scale up and grow, because they're young enough to be able to create the culture in a way that is going to be positive moving forward. I think large organizations have got this challenge that they've been around for so long. They're big organizations. It's like trying to, turn a huge ship, ocean liner.
Yes.
Whereas the scale-up organizations are more those nimble little speedboats, because they've got none of that or very little of that sort of history and baggage that they need to, work out how they're going to cope with that before they can move forward. They're starting from a sort of a really good base. So my ideal client really is that scale up and grow organization that is open to being more coaching in the way that it's actually introducing culture in the organization as well.
Would you believe that the way we manage change impacts culture?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, just from my limited experience of organizations, and, everybody's got different experiences, I would say this project culture and how change has become linked to project management is part of the challenge, because it drives that linear approach to change.
Yes.
And we know that change doesn't happen on a linear basis. And it also, this changing mindsets and individual change, we know that the system will always exert greater power than the individual ever can.
Yes.
Therefore, individual change is really not relevant when we're talking about organizational change. It's understanding how do you create systemic change through systems within the organization, and teams are obviously subsystems within a larger system. So how do you help teams understand how they work with other teams, how they create teaming skills, so that you hopefully create that more systemic approach to change rather than seeing it as a project linear-based change.
You were right. The system is it's got many nodes, and we only work on one. And if the change experience is really substandard, then that impact will be almost nothing. And the scheme of things, and you're completely right. The whole always overwhelms the parts. Yeah. One thing is missing in our practice, which I've only realized this over the last couple of years, is that if we work on a particular project or a change, I started to try to link it to, as a result of this, what behaviors and what ways of working we expect to be better.
Yeah.
And so rather than we just make it happen and we move on to another project. And what I'm talking about and what you're talking about is really difficult stuff. The moment you start talking about behaviors and values and what people appreciate in the workplace, it becomes really complex. And so the common reaction to it is that it's too hard. I need to move on because I'm getting paid daily rate and they want me to be on this project and all of that. And so I should say that I'm in a lucky situation now where I don't just play as a part of the project group. I'm an advisor to the business as well, and I'm happy to sit in the steering committees and ask the hard questions to the leaders. Yeah. It's kind of funny because they accept it when the intention is right behind those questions, and they accept it when you offer solutions to help as well. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, it was interesting because as you were talking there, it reminded me many, many years ago, it was in the 90s now, I worked with a very smart consultant, and he created a sort of a systemic map of all of the change. So, a real sort of program view of the change. And it was absolutely massive. And I think that was really, I think it scared the executive because it was, like you say, it's huge. From my perspective, I think what it did was it actually explained that it's okay because something that we're looking at over here has got multiple levels. So, you don't worry that it's actually feeling challenging because it's meant to feel challenging because you're trying to change a whole system. So I think there's something about helping executives be okay with complexity as well. And I know they've got massive drivers on them from all of their stakeholders, and it's a challenging place to be. And so I think what you said about asking difficult questions and also being supportive with suggestions is really important. And even if they say, oh, those suggestions aren't good, it doesn't matter, because if you leave your ego out of it, then what you're trying to do is the suggestion that you've made might not be good. What it might do, though, is it might then trigger them saying, I don't like that suggestion, but what that's made me think of is this over here.
Absolutely.
And that's brilliant, because you've helped them with that thinking process, which is all that we can hope to do as coaches when we're working with our clients.
And we're just going to have to be mindful as well, Rao, that when we present our suggestions and ideas, and we're going to have to be mindful that we do not see the whole picture. We've got a lot of blind spots, and therefore the way we present our information and ideas, we're going to have to think through them.
Yep.
And rather than creating more, talking about stuff that we know very little about, and we need to be also mindful to start small and start growing things, because starting big is not going to help anybody. And organizations nowadays, they're moving beasts. What matters today may be changed tomorrow, and so that it's a tricky business. And I wouldn't recommend any change manager to immediately go and just go talk to the executives and the clients. But I think with experience and credibility and delivery, and offering options, and showing a genuine desire to help, it will go a long way towards promoting the practice as an enabler. And I always talk to people and saying we are in the business of influence and relationship building, because you cannot work with me unless I build a relationship with you. Absolutely. So it all comes back to, and we actually call it stakeholder management, but it's a very, very interesting term. And that management, I'm not too sure if I manage my stakeholders, but I can work with them and collaborate with them and support them and be there whenever I can even think ahead of them in certain situations. Accept the fact that at the end of the day, they are the decision makers, and that everybody, you can contribute to the game, but you're not the game, and because we see only one angle of that game, and it's just that little window that we see life through. So you work in the business of growing talent. What do you think of change capability as part of talent?
So for me, change capability is part of your leadership skill set. So as a leader, your role is to grow the business. That's what you're there to do. And that could be top line growth. It could be bottom line growth. It doesn't matter. That's what you're there to do. So by virtue of that, you need to understand change. You need to understand how you as a leader are going to work with change and help change and, become part of the way that you grow the organization. So really, change capability is all about leadership capability for me. And I know that may be different to some other people's views that, often when we talk about change capability, it's about change professionals that we're talking about.
Yes.
For me, it's about leadership development and leadership capability.
Yes, and I completely agree. Look, sometimes I do wonder. I was at a business forum, and I did make a remark around, I can help you, but you are the change leader. You cannot outsource your responsibility to me. And I can help you with ideas. I can help you with organizing things. I can help you manage resistance, give you a few ideas. But at the end of the day, it is a leadership responsibility. I do think also, and I'm a strong believer in this, is that it's a mutual responsibility. It's a leader and a follower as well. So we cannot just accept that the leader is on a stage and I'm sitting in the audience seat and look at the performance of the leader and think, I like it and I don't like it. The idea is that we're all in the same game. It's like, well, you will get that. It's like soccer. You know, the job of the goalkeeper is not to stop the balls from entering the goal. The job of the goalkeeper and the defender and the midfielder and the striker and the coach and the massage therapist is to help the team win.
Yep.
That's
absolutely.
the job. What they do is just part of it, but that's not really the real purpose of the job.
Yeah.
So in an organization, everybody their job is the purpose they pursue rather than the stuff they actually do on a daily basis, because everybody should be aiming to help the team win.
Absolutely. So I'm a huge fan of Ted Lasso.
Yes.
And I don't know if you've seen it. It's brilliant.
I have, yes.
Yes, I love it. And for me, it's like team coaching masterclass. You know, there is one episode where he talks about they've got a striker who is like, he thinks is the best thing since sliced bread. Yes. And every time he goes out on the pitch, it's all about him. It's, you know, it's me. And what Ted Lasso, the coach, actually says to him, well, it's about the 11 of you. It's not about you. You're merely performing a role in the collective outcome of winning the match. And so I absolutely agree with you that the leader is performing a role. You as a change professional are performing a role. Together, you are a team. Together with other people, you are a team, and you have a collective responsibility to deliver something for the organization. So, yeah, teamwork for me, as I said, is my highest value. And when it works well, you can see the difference in organizations. Those teams that work well, that understand that they have that collective responsibility, they're the ones that perform. And when they have a bad day, they support each other. They don't, there's none of this sort of blame culture. Yes. They actually support each other so they can move forward. So, yeah, absolutely agree with you.
Yeah. I want to ask you one question before we get to talk about your books, Bro. What's your observation currently? What's your assessment of how organizations manage change?
I think there are lots of different, there are some good examples and there are some bad examples. I think a lot of organizations take that sort of project approach to change. Yeah. And because of the changing nature of business, there's as you say, you're working a complex system. So one day you can be working for this outcome. The next day, all things change because something's happened. And therefore you have to do a 180-degree pivot to do something different. So taking that sort of project approach to change doesn't necessarily fit in that kind of environment, because as you say, you've got a start, a middle and an end. Whereas when you're working in a complex system, you might not necessarily get even to the middle or even to the start because things have changed. So it's how you create teaming, how you create changing, the ability to change quickly rather than managing the change, because managing in my world means that you're trying to control it. And you can never really control change. It's like, what's the direction that we're heading in? What are the approaches we're going to take? Are those approaches working? Yes or no? What are we learning as we're going along the way? Are the things that we're finding out that we didn't know before? How are we using that information? If you create those skills and capabilities to pick up what you were saying before, then I think that gives you that flexibility to then roll with the changes and different circumstances that happen as part of natural life. So I think those organizations that get that are usually more comfortable with things when they don't go according to plan. And those that have that project mindset get very upset when, and then they look for somebody to blame. So then that's when you see that sort of toxic blame culture coming in, which I don't think actually then helps them in the longer term in relation to change, because that then makes people afraid to do things differently because they think they're going to get some sort of, bad consequence as a result of things not working. So, yeah, I think most large organizations struggle with change because of that.
Yeah, and you would know this, and leaders, whatever decision they make and whatever comments they make, they create precedents all the time. And precedents push behaviors, and behaviors become the culture. And then, so if I get a slap on my hand because something did not go right in a project or a change, and then the leader will be saying, yes, that's actually the project group and not my team. You create that culture, whether you like it or not. It might be true. But the approach can be different. The approach can be, all right, well, the project team is stuffed up.
Yeah.
But what about you? What have you done to work with the project team when you realize things were not really working? So it's a responsibility rather than now it's actually the project. Then next time there's a project, I can create that expectation behavior from the project team and also from the users to say, I look forward to seeing this change being adopted smoothly. Disruption will happen. I expect both of you to work together and be patient during this particular process. That's a different conversation from saying, hang on, the project team did not really do a good job.
Yeah. And it's back to those coaching behaviors again.
You're right.
You're coaching rather than, sort of telling off in effect. And I think the other thing that comes out for me there as well is that ultimately you as the leader set the tone. So, but that doesn't mean that you can't say that you're frustrated or annoyed, because you've also got to acknowledge the current reality. So coaching doesn't mean you don't accept and acknowledge the current reality. It's very much into what's happened at this moment in time. It's like, well, we're already, fed up because this has gone off the rails. It's like, okay, well, do we need to just take a moment to just, really say what's on our mind and let's get it out in the open. Okay, so now we've done that. What are we going to do about it collectively? What are we going to do about it? We've all acknowledged that it's not gone great. So what are we going to do about it? So I think organizations being more authentic about acknowledging when things don't go well as well, and that being okay, because you need to learn from mistakes. If you don't, then you're going to repeat the same things over and over again. Yeah,
and be realistic about if things don't go well. Is it really things didn't go well, or is it one component and the 90% went well? So, because sometimes people say, and you talked about the person you worked with, which I kind of done every organization I choose to join. I create that roadmap of all the changes that are actually happening, because then they will see how many changes impacting the same group multiple times and all of that. But the idea behind it is that you manage expectations. You often hear people saying there's a lot of change, but when you put the evidence in front of them, you might think, oh, okay, yes, there are 3 changes, but they're all low impact.
Yeah.
So that's manageable in 3 months. That's okay. Yes, it might be true, but it's not quite true, the statement that you just... So when you present evidence, you actually weed off all of those, statements that can cloud decision making, especially the loud voices in an organization. I want to shift gear and I want to talk about your books. So talk to me about your books.
So I've written 5 books, she says confidently, because I lose track of how many I've written. So my first 2 books were co-authored with Gillian Jones, and the first one we actually wrote was 50 Top Tools for Coaching, which was published back in 2009. And we're now on the 5th edition of that. So that's been doing really well. And that's a practical book to help coaches or anybody who wants to do coaching with simple tools that they can use. We also wrote at the same time, but it didn't get published till later, a book on how to create a coaching culture. And obviously in that, we talk a lot about change and how you can help support change in organizations, including things like, stakeholders, including things like communication and so on. So that was published in 2014. I also have written 3 books on my own. The first one was group coaching, which I wrote because I was working at that time with a lot of groups, not teams. They were from disparate areas, so they didn't have a common goal other than learning. And so I wrote this book on group coaching because I enjoy doing it, and I wanted to give some tools for people to use and also consider talent in organizations as well. So it was about how do you use groups to leverage collective talent? And that then led to me writing a book, a very short book called 55-Minute Guide on Talent Management. Are They on the Right Bus? Which was really, lifting the lid on how talent management was perceived at that time, which was in 2011.
Yes.
And it was a real sort of no holds barred in terms of what my experience had been working in HR, and how I saw some of the tools and techniques and methods were actively not helping talent come to the fore in organizations. And in fact, they were based on lots of biases and views that clearly didn't stand up to scrutiny. And then back in 2021, or 20, where it was really 2019, but really when I started writing it for the publisher, it was 2021 is my book on coaching self-organizing teams. And that was because I was working with Charlotte and with a lot of teams, and we were seeing that ability to self-organize and support the teams was important. And I was using a lot of my coaching skills, and I thought, well, I'd quite like to help particularly agile coaches, people who are doing coaching out there, working with teams. I'd like to help them with some practical resources and also research that they can then use to sort of leverage their own practice of coaching teams. So that book was published in December last year. So that's Coaching Self-Organizing Teams.
Wonderful. Congratulations. All of your books and the links to them and how people can get a copy of them will be on the podcast information, Rao.
Thank you.
I often ask my guests one last question. Knowing what you know now and after this conversation, and knowing my passion about change management and helping the change management practice community be better and as a contributor to organizations, what would be some of the advice you would like to provide to people like me in the change practice community, knowing that sometimes part of our job is to coach?
So obviously I would be saying that you need to get, if you don't already, then I would definitely recommend, getting some coaching skills. And I think the three things that I always talk about in coaching, regardless of whether you're a team coach, an individual coach, executive coach, whatever you are, there are three core pillars of coaching. One is the ability to ask questions. The other one is the ability to listen and create the space for the team or individual. And the third one is the ability to observe and provide reflection space for the person or the team. So they would be my three core sort of pillars of competence, if you like, that I would say start with, and then build your own coaching practice from there on in. So listening, questioning, and the ability to observe and provide reflection.
Fantastic. Listening, asking the right questions, and allow time to reflect. Definitely, I'll take that on board myself. Rao, it's been a pleasure having you as my guest in the Inner Game of Change podcast, Rao. How would people reach out to you, employers and or anybody else?
So I would say the best way to contact me, because it's the easiest way, is LinkedIn. Go to my LinkedIn profile, send me a personal message, and I will respond accordingly. Fantastic.
And we're going to put all the information about you, Rao, in the podcast. It's been a pleasure having you, Rao, as my guest. And I look forward to having you again at some stage in the future, talk about perhaps more books, but most probably we're going to dive deeper into one of your books as well. But until that time, I really appreciate your time, and stay well and stay safe.
Thank you very much. I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. I hope you enjoyed listening to this episode. To know more about my guests and this podcast, check the innergameofchange.com.au website and remember to subscribe. I can't wait to share with you my next episode. Until then, stay well and stay safe.